Um, I want to talk to you about Captain Marvel. More specifically, some of the responses that the movie is receiving and the actress Brie Larson is receiving. Now, a while back ago, a GoFundMe was started, it's like some sort of crowdfunding campaign was started up so that young girls who are underprivileged could go see this movie because there are some people out there who feel that it is a big deal for girls to go see female empowerment on the screen. And there are a lot of people who have a problem with this. And, just to sum up really quickly, the people who have a problem with this, in my personal opinion, the only reason why they have a problem with it is because it's a liberal SJW person supporting the idea of doing so. And they are acknowledging that because they'll be the first ones to point out that there are a lot of strong female characters out there. There's been decades of strong female characters out there. And even though at some points the SJWs tend to want to overlook this fact, what needs to be understood is that the anti-SJWs also, when they speak about these things and they complain about someone like Brie Larson, someone who vocally advocates for feminism, for girl power or female empowerment, that's the exact same thing that those other characters represented. The only difference is they never acknowledged them. Ripley was an example of a strong female character. Sarah Connor, Celine from Underworld, Alice from Resident Evil, Xena, Buffy, Mulan. People like to bring up Mulan. That's two people brought up Mulan. One of them video, I just watched part of it, so that's why Mulan was fresh in my head. And, they bring up all these other comic book characters. Osaka, if I'm saying the name right, Osaka, character from Star Wars Clone Wars that fans were annoyed with at first, but eventually became a fan favorite because of her character development. And they say that's how you're supposed to do it. So these people, they are upset at basically if you just mention that you want to represent female empowerment. So it's not the fact that the character is a representation of female empowerment, because all these other characters, G.I. Jane, all these other female characters were representations of female empowerment. They just didn't acknowledge it. The closest one out of all those groups would be G.I. Jane, because that was a movie about a woman who was trying to join the Navy SEALs and prove that men could do the same thing that women could do the same thing that men could do. Not better, but just the same thing that men can do. That movie was about female empowerment. But they would say that movie doesn't push it down your throat as much as what they do today. But at the same time, if that movie had never came out and a movie like that came out today, they would look at it as female empowerment and they would be against, because that's the mentality that they have. But getting back to the situation with the crowdfunding, because there are people that are really going off on Brie Larson for this. And if I'm correct, I'm not entirely sure, but if I'm correct, she didn't even start the GoFundMe campaign or the crowdfunding campaign. Somebody else did. She just caught wind of it and she just decided to promote it because she felt it was a good idea. So a lot of people, I think, that probably feel or think that she's the one that started it. Maybe she did. I'm not entirely sure. So if I'm wrong on that, then I'm just wrong. And even if I am wrong, who cares? What's the problem? But the main thing I want to point out is that I find very interesting. If I recall correctly, there wasn't this much hate, backlash, and venom when the exact same thing was done with Black Panther. Yeah, that's right. Black Panther had a similar situation where people started up crowdfunding campaigns so that underprivileged black kids could go see this movie that they felt was a, I don't want to say cultural phenomenon, but they felt that it was culturally significant for that community. Nobody complained. or if they did complain, it wasn't to the extent to the complaints that are being made for this movie. Now, why is that? Why is that? Now, on the surface, you could easily sit there and say, well, because Black Panther's a male movie, male-dominated movie, and with a male lead, and not a male-dominated movie because it had female characters in it, but it's a male lead movie, and this is a female lead movie. So one could easily make the assumption that it has to do with sexism or misogyny. And they would have, and as far as evidence goes, that might not be the intent, but as far as the evidence goes, it could look that way. Now, the funny thing with evidence, what you got to realize is that you could be somebody who's completely innocent and the evidence could point to you being guilty, or you could be somebody that's completely guilty and the evidence could point to you being innocent. It all just really depends on how what the evidence is and how it's interpreted, and it's very easy to interpret it as a sexist type of thing. But you could go deeper into it. You can go deeper into it and just look at it in terms of just political points of view, social political points of view. Because another thing that Brie Larson is that a lot of people hate is that she is you could be a nice, call her liberal, or you could just say she's an SJW, or you could say she's a feminist. Now, the interesting thing about feminist is that there's what people would consider good feminism and what people consider toxic feminism. And I guess people would, a lot of times the anti-SJW sort of blur the lines. If anything revolves around female empowerment, they look at it as whamming toxic feminism, and they look at it as bad, no matter what it is. But anyway, they view Brie Larson as an SJW feminist with an agenda. And, I'm going to sit and admit this too. There have been a few times where Brie Larson's made some comments that I thought were cringy. More so, and a lot of people like to bring this up, the situation with saying she hates all white men. Because she gave a speech where she was talking about film critics and there being a disparity between, or discretion or disparity, whatever the word is. There's a disparity between the diversity in film critics. Most film critics are white males. At least that's what she points out. At least most of the film critics whose opinions actually matter in regards to getting films nominated and winning awards are white males. And even giving good reviews, good reviews could affect a film's box office, because people look at film critics and reviews and then they go, well, this film critic didn't give this movie a favorable review, so I'm not going to go see it. That sort of a deal. But I think it was more or less with awards and categories and stuff like that. Case in point, there are more white film critics than there are minority film critics. And she was just saying she wants the film critics to be more representative of the country. Now, this is a diverse country. Everybody likes to say, but the country is diverse. And even people who are against identity politics, they'll say the country is diverse. We're diverse. We're a diverse group of people, and we all agree to disagree with the SJWs or whatever the case may be. She just wants the critics to represent that. Because her whole point is, there may be a film critic who is watching a movie about whatever minority group that you want to put in there. And they may not be able to resonate with that, because they don't know what that person goes through. They don't know what it's like to be that minority, certain minority group. It could be a white male watching a movie about people of color. It could be a black male watching a movie about women. It could be a straight female watching a movie about LGBTQ characters. It could be. But it was just about, but her context was, it's just all a bunch of straight white males watching these movies and critiquing them. And she just wants more diversity in that. That's it. Now, the way she delivered her message was wrong, in my opinion, because she said it with a certain amount of venom. But at the same time, to sit her and say that she hates all white males, it's just absolutely preposterous and ridiculous. But people use that as a talking point or as a point of attack to justify their arguments against her. Now, let's just be clear, and let's be truthful, and let's be honest. If Brie Larson was not an SJW, was not a feminist, and she was, I would even go so far as to say she was leaning more towards the right, and she was making the exact same arguments that she's making, most of the people complaining about her wouldn't have any complaints. I also want to point out that a lot of people have issues with her being an SJW and a feminist, and they're really going after her in that regard. But interestingly enough, Chris Evans is also a liberal. You could go so far as to say an SJW. Chris Evans is also very outspoken, mainly against Trump and what the Republican Party is doing, but he is an outspoken liberal, and he is a feminist. If you listen to Chris talk about his mom and his family, whatever, Chris is a feminist. He's a male feminist, and he's a liberal. And he's been with the MCU for 10 years. Not once have I ever seen a video where people went after Chris. Not once did I ever see a video where people bash Chris. Not once did I ever see a video where people saying they should boycott Marvel because Chris Evans is in the movie. Mark Ruffalo is another SJW. Not once did I ever see anybody say anything in regards to him being an SJW and how they should avoid watching the Marvel movies. And he's outspoken. But for whatever reason, whatever it was that Brie Larson did, it struck a nerve. Now all of a sudden, oh, the Marvel's first flop, they need to cancel a movie, this, that, and the other thing. Very interesting how that works out. And it's more interesting how that looks. So, you can say what you want. You can defend yourself how you want. And to be completely honest with you, I honestly believe most of them when they say that it has nothing to do with her sex or gender. But the question still remains, why is it with these male properties and these male actors, Chris Evans, Mark Ruffalo, the Black Panther, all do the same things that Brie Larson has done? But for some reason, these three get a pass, but Brie doesn't. Very interesting. Catch you on the flip side.